Maelstrom is back, and to me it sounds better than ever. Let's see what the new missions will do for the deck-based 40k game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where we've been looking at the new chapter approved 2019. We covered Eternal War missions and the general rules for match play in the last video, so in this video we're going to go through the general rules for Maelstrom missions and then the 6 specific missions that we have in this book. I think that Games Workshop has done a really good job of progressively refining their mission types, and they seem to be quite good at listening to criticism from the community each year. I already think that the Eternal War missions are the best we've seen out of any of the past chapter approved, and these Maelstrom missions also look really solid, if maybe a little bit more fiddling with cards before the game begins. So let's get into the rules for playing a new Maelstrom mission from this book. Now, the Maelstrom missions in this book are actually really quite different to the missions that were in the main rulebook. I believe that these are very similar rules to the ones that they released as a test in White Dwarf earlier in the year, although I can't say I have that particular issue, so I can't be 100% certain. Firstly, the way that you construct your deck has changed. In the last edition of Chapter Approved, you could drop up to 6 cards out of your deck to get rid of any cards that you thought were impossible or very hard to achieve. Games Workshop has massively doubled down on this approach, and now you can have a deck with as little as 18 cards in, although you can take more, I believe. No more than 1 copy of each uniquely named tactical objective can be present in each deck, but I believe that you can still take 2 copies of the Secure Objective X cards, because they actually have different names. In the Maelstrom missions, I believe that all of the objectives are set up via the standard way, where you roll off and you deploy 6 objectives alternately, and they can't be within 12 inches of another objective or 6 inches from the edge of the board, so that means all Maelstrom games are going to have 6 objectives. Now you have a hand of tactical objectives from which to play with. At the start of the battle, each player draws 5 cards to put in their hand. Their hand is kept like a hand of cards in any normal game of cards. You can see them yourself, but you don't have to show them to your opponent. If somehow you still manage to draw an entire slew of cards that you can't achieve turn 1, then you can choose to put them at the bottom of the tactical objective deck and draw 4 new ones, so you will have less, but this might be a good idea if you really can't achieve most of the cards in your hand. At the start of your turn, you must put tactical objectives onto the table until you have 3 in play. You can choose to place it face up or face down, but no player can have more than 1 card face down on the table at any point. So basically you're likely to have a hand of tactical objectives and 3 cards on the table, 2 face up and 1 face down, so you can keep your attentions hidden from your opponent on 1 card. They have a couple of clarifications when you're drawing a tactical objective card. If there are no cards left in your deck, then you do nothing instead. You're not going to be able to achieve any more objectives, so it might be more of an incentive to keep enough cards in your deck that you're not going to run out by the end of the battle. They also clarify that the discard pile isn't part of your deck, and once you put a card there, it's gone for good, unless there are any mission special rules or a stratagem that interferes with that. After you've played your hand, so you have 3 tactical objectives in play, you then draw again so your hand still has 5 cards in it. They've had to change the wording on priority orders received, the tactical objective that can only be done by your warlord, and scores you additional points for this. Basically, if you draw priority orders received, then you can choose any other 1 card from your hands to be part of that card, and it means that your warlord will have to do that one, and it counts as 1 card when put down from your hand onto the table. I think that this is really quite powerful. It's going to make that card very good, as you could easily just pick a very easy tactical objective to do for your warlord, such as securing a home objective, and get the bonus points for doing it with your warlord as well. So that card's gone from a bit of a nuisance to something that's going to be reliably quite easy to do, in my opinion. At the end of each turn, both yours and your opponent's, you check both of your in-play tactical objectives, and if any of your objectives have had their needs met, you must achieve them. You don't have the option to save it for another round where you might be able to score more points with it. That card is simply achieved. You score the points for it and then discard the card into your discard pile. Also, at the end of your morale phase, you can discard any of your in-play tactical objectives, so you could get rid of all 3 if they're all unachievable, which frankly is a bit unlikely seeing as you've selected the cards that you can achieve at the start of the game, and then have the best 3 out of 5 to put in play. Achieving tactical objectives is going to be a lot easier in this game. You're a lot less likely to be left with junk if you've got at least some units killing enemy units and standing on some objectives. Now there are 3 new stratagems that Games Workshop have thought up to go alongside this system. Firstly, we have Reprioritize. This is 2 command points, and you discard 2 cards from your hand at the start of your turn, and draw 2 newer tactical objectives instead. So this could be good to limit the effects of a bad hand, and it's slightly more powerful than the 2 command point stratagem to drop 1 tactical objective that exists at the moment, as you can do it with 2. Next we have Tactical Foresight for 1 command point. This is an interesting one for seeing what's coming. You spend 1 command point and you can look at the top 3 cards of your tactical objective deck. You can then put them back at the top of the deck or the bottom of the deck, and in any order. I'm not sure if this one will be used that much, to be honest. If you put them back at the top of the deck, then you are still going to get the same 3 cards pretty soon one way or the other, regardless of which order you put them in. But I guess it could be helpful if useless cards are coming up and you put them at the bottom of the deck. The thing is, I think it's more likely that rather than seeing 3 useless cards, you might see 2 that are good and 1 that's bad, or 2 that are bad and 1 that's good. And then is it really worth ditching them to the bottom of the deck when you might just be left with the exact same situation straight after? Personally, I don't think that this one's going to be that much use, but then I haven't played any of these missions, so it remains to be seen if this is that useful. Finally, we have Determined Push for 2 command points. Now this one's quite interesting. You can select 3 cards from your discard pile and shuffle them back into your tactical objectives deck. This means that you could pick 3 very easy to achieve tactical objectives, say scoring all your home objectives, and have a decent chance of them coming out again later in the battle. I think this will be particularly interesting once you're getting very low on cards towards the end of the game. Say if you have 2 other random objectives left in your deck, and you have 2 command points left, putting in 3 guaranteed cert objectives to dilute those 2 means that you're almost certainly going to get them, and it could help you absolutely capitalise on the last turn or 2, say in a game that you're winning, and you have the opportunity to stand on which objectives you like. This could also be a way of getting cards back to score at the end of the game if you've managed to burn through your entire deck. One ramification that I didn't think about at the start of the video is that because you select the cards for your deck before you play a Maelstrom mission, it means that you won't know which objectives are the ones that you want and which ones are the ones that you want to ditch. This means for the secure and defend objective cards, you're not going to know which ones are your home objectives and which ones are your opponent's objectives. So by whether or not you keep them or not, you're gambling on having more board control in total than your opponent. So I think that's a really interesting little system. On the whole, it's going to mean that you score tactical objectives a lot more reliably and a lot less randomly. Too much randomness was generally the main criticism of the tactical objectives. I personally do quite like them. I think on the average of games, you will generally get a lot more points if you are winning the game via Maelstrom objectives, but there are just the odd game where the cards will just be massively against you and someone will get a win when they probably shouldn't have really, usually just by drawing an improbably helpful card or 2, such as say your warlord defending an objective late in the game, when that was very easy to do and you only had 1 objective left to defend. I think that a less swingy Maelstrom is definitely a good thing, and I think that the changes are positive on the whole, and I'm looking forward to giving them a try. One thing that does concern me for tournaments a bit is that both players can keep their hands hidden. I know the vast majority of players will play honestly, but by having a hidden deck it does give you more opportunity for dishonesty, which in a hyper-competitive setting isn't always the best thing. I don't expect it's going to be the biggest concern ever, as most people won't want to cheat when they're playing model soldiers, but it's not entirely unheard of. I guess we'll see how tournament organisers will respond to this, and whether they pick it up for use in their game systems. Now we've gone through the way that you play Maelstrom of War missions, let's look at the 6 scenarios themselves. First up we have Covert Maneuvers, and this is an interesting little scenario that is basically the standard Maelstrom mission, but gives a buff to the player who's coming second in the progressive scoring. Basically, if there's a player who's in the lead on victory points, then all of their cards immediately become face up, so you can't hide what you're doing, and if there's a player who's coming second in terms of victory points, then all of their cards must be turned face down. So basically the player who has the most victory points is going to be at a disadvantage because the trailing player will be able to see exactly which cards he has and maybe thwart some of them, such as eliminating certain units that are defending a key objective. And the player who has the lead won't be able to tell exactly what cards his opponent is trying to achieve, so won't be able to counter anywhere near as effectively. This is quite an interesting little bit of game design, and it should help make for games that are a lot closer, points-wise, than they would have otherwise been. I really like it, and I think that it's a positive idea, as close games make for more exciting games on the whole. Next up we have Ambitious Surge, where it's again the standard way of playing Maelstrom, except when you have the 3 cards on the table at the start of the movement phase, your opponent will nominate one of your cards, and that card is worth an additional victory point if that player can achieve it in their turn or their opponent's turn. Again, I think this is really quite a fun little twist. It basically means that your opponent's going to be trying to pick the objective that you're going to find the hardest, and that will give you an extra bit of motivation to try and achieve that objective. It might be a bit swingy as to whether or not you draw 2 objectives that you can achieve or 3 objectives that you can achieve, and that might be a bit random, but on the whole I think it's an interesting idea. Next up we have Critical Objective, which in my opinion is only a minor deviation from the standard way of playing this new Maelstrom game. Basically at the start of each turn, before you draw objectives into your hand, you can take 1 card from the discard pile and shuffle it back into your deck. That means if the stars align and you draw it again, then you could potentially achieve the same objective twice or maybe even 3 times within the course of a game. That could be pretty powerful if it's something big like kill X amount of units in the shooting phase and you'll know that you're going to kill lots of units repeatedly in each shooting phase. You could rack up quite a lot of victory points that way. But it does depend on you drawing that same card again, which certainly isn't guaranteed when you have a big deck full of objectives. So a minor deviation, and reasonably interesting. Next up we have Disruptive Tactics, which is again the standard Maelstrom mission with a twist. This one's twist is that at the start of each player's turn, before you put tactical objectives into play, your opponent can look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put 1 card to the bottom, so he's going to choose the card that he thinks is the most easy for you to achieve, and then put the other 2 cards down on top of the deck in the order of his choosing. So basically the tactical objectives are going to be very slightly harder to achieve this game, but seeing as you still get a hand of 5 cards and you have pre-selected the cards, in general you're still probably going to get a fair bit of success. It could just be a little bit annoying if you're in the position to score some big cards like Supremacy or killing several enemy units in 1 turn, and have that opportunity taken away from you. It might make for a closer and more stable game though, with less big swings. So again, another mission I'm pretty much in favour of. Next we have Territorial Control, and the twist in this one is that you can draw an extra card to put in your hand before putting your objectives in play if you control more objectives than your opponent at the start of your turn. So this is a bit of a reward for the player who's got the most board control. They're going to have just that little bit more flexibility than their opponent when they choose which tactical objectives are going to be played. I sort of feel like this one might be doubling down a little bit on who's controlling the most objectives, because if you have more objectives, then you're going to get more tactical objectives, and they're going to be easier to score because you're already on most of the objectives. So it might be helping the rich get richer just a little bit, but I don't think it's going to have the biggest effect on the game, and it just means that you're going to have to tactically prioritise taking as many objectives as you can and denying your opponent as many as possible. So it's just going to mean that you have slightly different priorities in this game. The last mission is Confined Command, which is basically the same Maelstrom mission, but the twist is that again your opponent can disrupt your Maelstrom cards, this time by choosing an active objective in play at the movement phase, so just after you've played your objectives. That objective is returned to the deck and shuffled in, and then you get to put a new tactical objective down in its place. So again, it's going to slightly limit the amount of tactical objectives that you can score, and might again protect against big swings. I suspect that you might often want to take out the card that's face down that you don't know what it is, as your opponent might have hidden their most important card there, so you don't know what it is. Again, I think this is a perfectly reasonable twist on Maelstrom, and a good mission. Just to clarify, every single one of these missions also has the standard Slay the Warlord, First Strike and Line Breaker special rules, which will all give you a victory point for achieving them just the same as before. I'm glad that they've kept First Strike instead of First Blood, because it doesn't just reward the player who goes first. So overall, I really like these. Again, I think that these are probably better than any Maelstrom missions we've seen in the past. I think Games Workshop have done very well to not limit the objectives to any particular types of armies. Like in the past one, we saw ones that either benefited or penalised characters, and there's that one in the Eternal War mission that relies on troops, which your army might not necessarily have. Not to see anything like that is great. I also think that not to see flat kill points in it is also great. As I said in the Eternal War missions review, I find kill points very swingy, particularly when you can be fighting with 2 armies, one that has 10 more kill points available than the other, for example. So those are 2 mechanics that I'm very glad to have seen left out. The only major negative that I see is that it could be a bit fiddly setting up your Maelstrom cards before each game. By having the option to remove up to half of the cards, you could have a fair bit of faffing around before you actually start playing model soldiers, which isn't a particularly positive thing. I think that the result of this, though, will mean that you have a lot fewer cards that are just not doable, and you should be consistently scoring a few points each turn, and it is more likely to reward the player who is actually winning the battle, even more so than the previous version of Maelstrom, which I think still generally did do this, barring some random swings. Now I know not everyone is into Maelstrom missions. Personally I quite like them as I've played a lot of ETC, so I'm quite used to something like this plus an internal war element too. Please let me know your thoughts on the new missions down in the comments below, and feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more content like this. I also have a Patreon, so feel free to support that if you'd like to help out the channel. These videos take a long time to make, so if you're getting good value out of my content, please consider a small donation. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.